Right, which breathlessly brings me to the dream team that is my guests for, who are my guests for this morning. So Jane Hewitt is, has been a teacher, was a teacher, has retired, and is probably busier since her retirement than ever.
Yeah, it's not going well.
Not going well. She is our granny with a camera. If you look at the Independent Thinking website, you'll see all sorts of amazing photos of associates and conferences and all sorts of things, and 99% of those are from Jane. She has the ability through her photography to become invisible, and then just she captures the soul of people in the photos. What she's also been doing over the course, and she wrote a book for the Independent Thinking Press a while back about learning through a lens, the power of photography. And it's not a photography book, it's a book about looking and stopping. There we go. And being
I haven't even got my copy here, Juliet. I've got yours.
Product placement. We can look at that. It's typical product placement. I like that. Her photographs also appeared in the amazing and best-selling and award-winning books of our other guest, Juliet Robertson. Dirty Teaching, my favourite title for an independent thinking book, and Messy Maths. And yeah, oh, there we go. More product placement. I've just got my clever books up. I don't think I've got any of mine there, but just my clever ones. Juliet's work is amazing in that it's about the fact that the classroom is what goes on outside, and occasionally you might come inside just to put your wellies on. And that if ever there was a time for us to focus on learning outdoors and everything that entails, then now is the time. So I'm really pleased and excited to have both of them here. So let me start with Juliet. Let's with the what now stuff. Why was learning outside, learning outdoors important before all of this sort of kicked off? Juliet.
It's important in so many ways. It's important for me when we think about children. You were talking about the human element. Being outside is a different environment. A different environment causes us to think, feel, and act differently. And you can think about that with a cup of coffee. Drinking a coffee inside is a very different experience to outside. And therefore, the use of the outdoors to support our children can provide them with a better learning environment that may meet their needs in a deeper and more sensory way, as well as in a purely cognitive approach.
Okay, so what happens with the weather? Why, where we just hurry from the car to the building because we're getting wet or getting cold or whatever? What? Go on.
Yeah, I think that's always something that people worry about. Perhaps a nice perspective is for us to think about comments like, for those who think that sunshine brings happiness, they may not have danced in the rain, which is one of the quotes I think I might have even put into Dirty Teaching. If not, it was certainly in another document I wrote. And I think that's just about being prepared. And a friend from Canada, Megan Zenny, has written a brilliant blog recently, and I'll tweet about it, because she just says, plan for what's the worst weather you think you're going to get, and plan for that. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly anything better than that is a bonus. And the other thing too is that you just dress appropriately. People will bring the right gear. If they don't have the right gear, there's a big drive in Scotland, particularly within the early years, to what we're calling poverty-proof clothing. In other words, if your kids can't supply it, why don't you supply that yourself? A set of outdoor clothing for a class is no more expensive than an interactive whiteboard and lasts just as long.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And then is it a Norwegian saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing? It's that sort of idea as well, isn't there?
It is, and that seems to be lost in things. Billy Connolly has also attributed that quote as well, which I think is kind of nice. But he was also the one who said about Scotland, we have winter, and then we have June, and that's our seasons. So
June's got the midges, so we don't go outside. So you use the term multi-sensory. So what are the benefits of things being multi-sensory?
Well, it was, funnily enough, this isn't an outdoor thing, but many years ago, my mum, who interestingly lost a year of education due to a TB neck gland, and we seem to have forgotten that this high attendance is a relatively recent thing in our human education history. If you read, which I'm doing at the moment, oh blush, a lot of Enid Blyton, Mallory Tower, St Clair's books, every single moment there's somebody off for a term because of, you know, they've got glandular fever, or they've had mumps, or that sort of thing. So often there's quite you know, it's quite interesting to see our take in the current time on that. I've now lost the thread of the question, so you're going to have to remind me again.
We're talking multi-sensory.
That's it. So still going to have to prompt me. My brain isn't working. There's a wasp in my room.
Suddenly became embarrassed that you were telling the world you're reading Enid Blyton.
Yeah, no, is that true?
We're trying to look for it now on your bookcases. Where's the famous 5? Why is you used the term multi-sensory learning? Why is it important to involve all the senses, and why is that more important outside and more doable outside than inside?
Yes, I think it's to do with senses create memory. If you think about Christmas, a lot of people will say, oh, remember the smell of oranges that were always at the bottom of the stocking, or something like that. Smells are evocative, smells stay with us. So does colour, so does light, and so do all these things. So when you are in an environment that allows light changes, that allows smells to pass by, you were mentioning about the birds tweeting. That's something that people will remember from this time. So it's almost like it unlocks a deeper layer within our memories. So I think that's one of the reasons why. And going back to the connection with my mum too, was that she said she learnt the alphabet by smelling it. And my sisters both, when they're having conversations and they're talking, they see the words as if a pen is writing them above whatever's happening. Wow. So again, people learn in very different ways, and I think it is unfortunate that we still largely have a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, what was the phrase somebody used in one of these conversations this week? One size fits one. It's that approach, but we know how learning happens now, so everybody learns this way because we've done away with learning styles, which is fair enough, we're back and everything, but there's much more to, and much more than you can fit on a tweet when you have these sorts of conversations. The link between smell and memory of all the senses, smell is the one most closely linked to memory, and it sort of bypasses sort of higher regions in our brain. So you get a smell and suddenly you're thinking about your gran or your infant. I walked past the school yesterday and suddenly I was back in my infant school and I couldn't work out why. It's like, oh, I realised it was because of the smell from this school in Rotterdam, the smell of the bleach or whatever it was. So yeah, the memory. And if so many people are, or the system that we seem to be working towards is learning is about what you can remember. So if we can make it easier to remember in a multi-sensory way without rote learning and repetition and everything, which also works for memory, then fair enough. Just bring it back to Jane. So in terms of being out inside or outside, when you're working with young people around with photography, for example, what differences do you see between how they work inside and how they work outside and the effect, Jane?
I think when they're in a classroom, they're used to certain classroom rules or whatever. They will sit calmly, they will walk calmly. Even if they're doing group work, whatever, you take them outside with a camera and you turn around and they're laid on the floor on their back, taking a picture up towards a tree. I've never seen a child do that in a classroom. I mean, I have, but you give them a camera and in the classroom they will sit and they'll take pictures in front of them. Take them outside and they want to be in the middle of things and they're looking at the really tiniest of details, the insects. I did a session with some 3-year-olds at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park and they're surrounded by all these amazing sculptures, and we spent 20 minutes with a caterpillar because the caterpillar was what they wanted, and they were all laid on the floor, not hurting the caterpillar, not touching it, but that's what they were doing. And I think we feel that the outdoors is different. Like Juliet said, it's got so much there in terms of sensory. And I think it's important that we let them go where they want as long as they're safe. And I know, Juliet, when you do your sessions and you're introducing anything, that once you've done your safety briefing, if you like, then you can leave the children to work.
I'll come back to. I want to nail the health and safety issue in just a little while, so we can put that to one side and know that that's covered. Just, it's interesting what you said in the classroom. They sort of work that way, and then outside it's like they move from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, isn't it? That's what I think when you're describing that suddenly they realise that there's an up and a down, not just a front and a back.
And almost when they're in the classroom, even if you say to them, right, lie on the floor, put your camera on the floor, lie on the floor and do this, they're like, here, we sit here. Do you know what I mean? That's unspoken. Even with older children, they're like, okay. Whereas outside, they're off and they're jumping and they're doing, to see what effects they can get. It just sort of gives this huge sense of space and freedom.
And with photography, it's another thing we can nail is, to what extent is the process of taking the photos the important part, or the end result, the bit of the photo?
Oh, it's never the end result, in terms of the end result is subjective, completely subjective. Whenever I do sessions, I always start with the Andreas Gursky photo that sold for 4.3 million. And it's, sorry if anybody likes it, but to me it's the flattest, most boring picture of just strips of green. And I put it up on the screen and say to people, I'm a struggling artist, will you give me £10 for this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, oh, come on. And eventually when I say it's like 4.3 million, they're like, what? I then put up a picture that was taken by a 3-year-old and said, do you prefer this one? And it's like, yeah. And the one with the 3-year-old, all right, it's not completely in focus, but it's got lots of circles of light and it's very abstract. Photography is about seeing, and it's the famous quote, it's not what you look at, it's what you see, isn't it? And you can't say, my husband hates anything that's abstract. And he'll say, you walk round Barcelona and he'll say, oh, this Gaudi fella's rubbish, 3-year-old could do this. Whereas other people think it's amazing. It's very personal, photography. It's never about the end result, other than you are pleased with it and you are proud of it. Not anybody else, you. And that's important for kids.
So it builds self-esteem and confidence. And
yeah. Oh, yeah. And they will want to share it, and they do love it, and they will start to learn different techniques, but it's about them playing and experimenting.
All right, okay, no, that's lovely, thank you for that. Let's nail this health and safety thing. I'll come back to Juliet for that. So just take us through, and I'm thinking maybe there are people, attendees here, but also we're going to put this video out next week, and people perhaps who, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later as well, but they realise that there's an outside space which will be easier for social distancing going back. So it's a whole new ball game for them, but they are maybe concerned. There's all sorts of risk assessments going on at the moment, and then they've got to take them outside or into the woods or whatever. So just briefly sort of nail the health and safety issues, Juliet. Take us through what's important.
5 minutes, Juliet.
Okay.
Oh my goodness me. Well, I think first of all, we all have health and safety procedures in place that we follow every day. I think we also need to remember a lovely quote from the Canadian forestry industry that says health and safety isn't about paperwork, it's about effective communication, looking after ourselves and looking after each other, or words to that effect. And if you take that as your mantra, then actually your health and safety will be taken care of. So when you go back, you may have risk assessments in place, but I think the key question is, how does that manifest? So how do we actively involve the children in creating a safe working place? And that will vary developmentally. I thought I was on Ruth Swale's little bit yesterday, Ian, and she was talking about, being superheroes in the early years, and you can manage the germs and the bug and things like that. And I think further up, we just need to sort of keep going back to what would work best. How can we remind ourselves, and what strategies do you think we should try, and reviewing those and revising those. Otherwise, it's very easy to get quite lax. So I think that can help. If you are social distancing, and I'm looking around to see if I do have a rope in here, but one of the things that can give people freedom, it worries me when I see very hard demarcations within a playground when children haven't played in that space in a social distancing way. How do you actually know it's going to work? So my advice would be, you can buy from Homebase or B&Q long lengths, like 30-meter lengths of rope, and you can tag them if you want 2 meters to help children get the idea. But you could have movable ropes outside so that you, with the children, work out what works best for different play areas, rather than coming in with a top down, these children must be there, those children must be there, because that actually might not suit how you work and they work and play outside. And furthermore, you might need different rules for playtime than you do for your work time outside. So there's a certain amount whereby I would encourage people to be very flexible, very open-minded, and very supportive, because of course mistakes are going to be made, and what worries me is that people will beat themselves up. It's already a big enough thing being asked to go outside without having to beat ourselves up about how we do it.
Yeah.
I also think as well that some of our children are quite frightened, and if we give them a bit of ownership, if you like, sorry for the word, but and let them sort of work things out for themselves, they will feel a measure of control. And actually watching children work, they know what is and isn't safe, and they can work that out. I mean, one of the schools I went to take pictures for one of your books had a climbing wall, Juliet. And the first time I went in, I thought, oh my God, there's nothing underneath this climbing wall. There are no, and I was like, and the children will only go so far. Don't feel safe now, come back. And you know, there wasn't somebody there saying, right, you can only go to that level, you can go to that level. They will work out for themselves, and it's giving them some sort of sense of, yeah, okay, let's play with these ropes. And I totally agree with you. Let's make them feel more comfortable and more in control.
The control bit is, go on, Juliet, go on.
No, safety is a participatory thing. And on the question and answer is, I don't know if you've seen Carla Gold's put in a lovely outdoor mantra. Am I safe? Is everyone else safe? Is all the stuff and equipment safe? And you could even add to that, and how's the environment doing as well? You know, because I think that's the other thing, you know, is that we're very egocentric and human-centric within education, and when you step outside you have a duty to encompass the more than human world into what you're doing. So that's being mindful of your impact within the space that you're in.
It's like the caterpillar wasn't touched, no caterpillars were harmed in the taking of these photos.
No, I mean, they were actually, because I was ready to say, oh, it's, you know, and they were so gentle with it. It was amazing. It, you know, and we just left them to it, you know, and the lady that was in charge was like, we need to go and look at this sculpture. And I'm like, no, we don't. No, this is what's important to the kids, and we'll stop with the caterpillar. They gave him a name, they were building him, you know, fetching him leaves. It was like, okay.
Yeah, the Yorkshire Caterpillar Park, there's some sculptures there.
But there's more caterpillars, yeah.
Something that has stayed with me, Juliet, we were working in Hong Kong a couple of years ago, and you had kids outside, and they were sort of 10-year-olds, I think 9, 10-year-olds, and some of them were climbing trees, and I could see the teachers from the school getting a bit agitated, and your view has always stayed with me. If they can get up, they can get down.
Yeah, I think too, in that situation there was one child up a tree who was clearly very able and clearly very safe. When you dynamically risk assess, it didn't take much to realise he knew what he was doing and no one else was trying. So I thought that was a really positive situation too. I loved, again, we've got another question come up from Miriam MacDonald about this too, and she's asked about planks, pallets, crates, free stumps, and whether these should be out of bounds at this time, or whether we let kids come up with solutions, and all the outdoor kitchens, wheelie toys, etc. And I think that again is another one within this context. First of all, I'm very frustrated at the moment because I'm not a dictator and I don't have control and influence in the way that I would like, unlike some political advisors. So therefore, it's very hard for me to say, I would do this, I would do that. Every single school is going to have to read the guidelines that are produced from their national government and make a decision about what that means in their context. But what we do know is that the COVID-19 virus appears to be destroyed, whether it's by heat or sunlight. When, you know, there seems to be a bit of a question mark, but certainly it doesn't seem to stay around as long outside, even on metallic surfaces. And furthermore, it does appear that when you have more of a porous surface like cardboard or like wood, that again, you know, you'd kind of have to be picking up and kind of licking it like that to really, you know, have harm created after a very short period of time. And in terms of the deep cleaning and things like that, there are strategies. So the National Network for Outdoor Learning, my understanding is, having chatted to Matt Robertson yesterday, is that they're going to be coming out with just practical suggestions.
Juliet's frozen.
Juliet's frozen. Oh.
So that look, you froze for that last bit. Practical suggestions. They're coming out with practical suggestions.
Yes. Can you still see me? It says my internet.
Good now. You just froze for a bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So so they come up with a practical suggestions over things like, what might hand washing look like? How can you practically clean things if you're suddenly being asked to, I don't know, deep clean all your guttering and things like that. There are approaches and solutions that are out there, you know, that involve things like, for example, how long can you have a big thingy of Milton's, like a water butt of Milton's? You know, is it safe to dunk things in and out? How long should they be in there for? That sort of thing.
I can tell you're a webinar pro because you're getting to the question and answer before I am. So I'm just going to go and get a coffee and leave you to it. You might as well.
I'm leaving you to. I can't multitask.
Yeah, which is very good. Well, while you're there, let's answer the question from Laura then, because if we're saying there's lots of benefits from being outside, what happens when the children go, I want to go back now? And she's specifically talking about children want to go back to nursery after a short period of time outside. What do you do? Go in and lock the doors? What happens?
I think the question there is that you have to, it's a fine balance. So I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago, well, it was longer than that, where I was doing supply cover every Friday in classes with children who had additional support needs. And 2 children, the moment we went outside in reception, they would just cry. They would just howl and howl and howl. So the decision was made that they would come out with us for 10 minutes, and after that they could choose whether they stayed or not. And it took the whole year. And by the second year, by the time they were in year 1, you would never known that was their reaction. So that was children who were extremely autistic, who struggled with language and expressing themselves verbally. And it took a long time. So I think it's hard between this balance between that free choice and sometimes what you need.
So that's exactly the same as it would be in the classroom. You know, you have some children who don't want to do certain things in the classroom. I had a very autistic child who would not sit at a desk. He would sit under the desk, but he wouldn't sit at the desk. So we spent 6 months with him learning under the desk, and then another 3 months with him sitting at the desk with a coat over his head. You have to find the balance, and you have to work with individual children. I don't think that's I think completely due to outdoor learning. It is learning and different ways of learning, and some children will find it harder, and there is a balance, and we have to work with each child. I know that's difficult, but
like you say, it's the same in the classroom. It's just outside. It's the same challenge of
the same challenges we're facing. We just
use your teacher intuition, your teacher skills to do it. There's Jane is asking a question about the practical suggestions. When you froze, Juliet, I think you were talking about some organisation that was offering, that had put a document out. You had a conversation yesterday. Who was that?
Yeah, it's the National Network for Outdoor Learning, NNOL, and they have a blog, and you can usually access that if you Google it. I think there was a really good point, though, from Laura about this before daily. My other thing would say, talk with your children about it. Find out from them what the problems are and problem solve with them about how you're going to deal with it. Because that way the children feel empowered. And very often other needs can empower things, or it's a curiosity thing. So in other words, if I ask and we are now going back, that gives me power. So maybe it's just about having conversations about the need to be out longer. How can we make ourselves stay out longer? What do we need to be comfortable, happy and interested outside? And every child will be different. So for example, I always have a soft toy with me for little children because I think that can be a connector. Some people are very anti stuff being taken to the forest, but if every child has their backpack and a kid wants to take, you know, their favorite dinosaur, bring him along. I mean, take photos, write the story of this dinosaur's adventure. So I think it's being very personally responsive to what those issues are for children.
To answer Lisa's question, and I'm aware Maxine's question is still dangling. We'll come back to that.
Yeah,
but
sorry,
Maxine.
Maxine.
Question about the sort of blending. Is it all outside or is it mixed? What do you think about toilet, snacks, lunches, that sort of thing? Inside, outside? And Jane might have a view on that as well. But go first.
Okay, so I think Lisa's one is really good. The decisions about whether you'll be completely outside or not lie with your management team. There is no decree that everyone should be 100% outside. And I would suggest that in terms of your children's emotional needs coming back after a long period of lockdown, if they are not used to that, is that necessarily an appropriate course of action to go 100% outside?
Okay.
Can I say though that when the children go back, they're not going back to what they're used to. If they're going back into a classroom that is socially distanced and they can't sit with their friends and they haven't got their toys, they're going to be frightened anyway. I'm very much aware of this. My grandson is 5, nearly 6. And he is going to freak out when he gets back to school and he can't hug his friends and sit with his friends. And so nothing is going to be as it was, is it? I just think the more changes, the more differences, the more control they've got. Let's go outside, let's come inside, let's not just be all sort of frozen. Does that make sense? Yeah,
a good a tip yesterday that came from Ruth Swales, the conversation Juliet mentioned earlier, who's sort of specialist within early years, was about taking photos in advance of the schools going back and sending them out.
Yeah,
and
very much
so.
so.
It not be totally alien when they walk in and their classroom looks totally different. At least they'll have seen it back to photography. They've seen it beforehand.
Yeah, and even that chance, Ian, to be able to contribute, both parents and children, to that process. What do you think of that? Have you got any ideas or adaptations that you think would be helpful? Because even little children have opinions. And I think too, my reticence about being completely outside is down to whether or not the environment suits that. Now, we are in summertime, but nevertheless, if you are working in an outdoor nursery or an outdoor school, it is not this concrete jungle that there are a lot of in the UK. There is lots of shelter. There is lots of naturalised areas that are aesthetically calmer to be in. There is toileting out there. It's not a trip indoors and out and things like that. So there's a certain amount if a school is going down a very outdoorsy approach, then they must make sure that they have adequate toileting outside, adequate shelter, adequate stuff that meets your basic needs of food, shelter, space, love, that sort of thing. Otherwise, those children are not going to cope, and neither are the staff. And that's the other thing. We've got to bring the staff and their feelings and confidence levels into this equation too.
You use the term aesthetically calming or calmer, I think. Let's just go to that, because stress levels are high and will be high. And then if we suddenly throw in an element of taking kids outside, and I've not done that before, we're upping it even more. Let's look at the other side and the benefits of being outside in terms of dealing with stress and handling stress and feeling calmer and the effect of green environments on us, what ideas or advice can you give around that, Juliet? And then we'll come to Jane.
Yeah, sorry, Jane.
No, fine, carry on. I mean, can I just say though, we've been talking about smells, and that, to me, that's going to be the first thing. They're going to go into school that smells of bleach, isn't it? So they're going to need a little bit of time. That's one of the ways I think, you know, going outside will help, but that's just a minor thing. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's good. So outside and feeling a bit calmer, Juliet, what's the secret there?
Well, the research suggests that it's about, again, the multisensory nature and how this impacts on the brain, and as a result it reduces the cortisol levels. So that seems to be the theory, and that the more greener the landscape, the better, up to a point. So if you do have local green space nearby and you are able to use it, then that's a very good thing. So it's one of my jobs at the moment, working with Aberdeen City, is saying, how do we make sure that earlier settings know what green space is available, who has the confidence and the competence to use that space already, and who's going to need a little bit of support to get that happening, if that is one of the measures that nursery or that school is going to put in place.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important, because I mean, Aberdeen's really urban, and you would think that there's not a lot of green space, but I've done the mapping and it's looking like 90% are within walking distance. And by walking distance, I define that for nurseries as your daily mile, half a mile there, half a mile back. Then no one can say we're asking too much of little children.
Wow. I remember reading last year that London is actually, if you count the number of trees divided by the space, it's actually a forest. It counts as a forest. London does, which is we never.
There's a lot of sort of wildlife. You know, there are some amazing photographers who just do the wildlife of London, and the foxes and the voles and everything are just stunning.
Talking of photography and wildlife, tell us about your daily challenge that you've been doing online, Jane. And what impact do you think that has on the people participating?
I think to begin with, once we went into lockdown, people were sort of stunned, really, weren't they? And we were told we could go for a walk, and we were going for a walk, but I got the impression people were just sort of wandering and didn't sort of know what was happening. So I started this daily photography challenge. Nothing at all drastic. It was just like one day, let's see what you can find that's green or yellow, or and then moving it sort of on to looking at, you know, what can you see? Can you see tiny things? Can you see things that are intertwined? Can you and it just, I've got schools, I've got people sort of messaging me saying it's really helped me to focus, and especially if you're walking the same route or a similar route every day, what's changing? What do you notice? And every day, little signs of spring, because we're talking back to March, aren't we? And there were just tiny buds, and these are now flowered, and the flowers are withering. But it is very much a case of I've worked with Martin Illingworth, who is one of our other associates with his students, and he talks about noticeability, because you can walk past something. I walked past a fence, not yesterday, the day before, I've no idea what day it is, the day before, and it said the virus is a hoax on this fence. Walked past it yesterday and somebody had crossed it off and put the virus is not a hoax. Now, I'm not suggesting we all go out and graffiti, but it was interesting. It was like, somebody else has walked this way. People are really good, and some of the things, you can put in other photos, and people are suggesting photo ideas. I've always done a 365 project where I've taken a photograph every day, and I have kept a diary, a journal from lockdown, mainly photographs, you'll not be surprised to know. A lot of them are screenshots from my FaceTime conversations with my grandchildren, but I've screenshotted things from newspapers. And even now, to read it back through, I can't remember some of those things, and it's a different how my thinking has changed and how things have changed through photographs. I just do a little bit every day, and if you're not doing that, that's brilliant. You can see the changes. Sorry for waffling, but it's just,
there's a phrase I like, and I can't remember where it came. Sort of close noticing, and that's what I really like about the photography. It's almost not entirely irrelevant, but almost irrelevant. It's about the close noticing. It's about stopping, thinking, looking deeply, and curiosity and wonder and all of that. And I know from your work as well, it's more than just photography. So, for example, some of the craft stuff you do is using leaves or flowers.
Yeah.
So show us, you've got some of that there. Show us the sort of thing you've been doing.
I've been doing cyanotypes, and this is an oak leaf. Can you see where the top came off my turmeric bottle? Yeah. Or you can, Juliet, I showed you these.
What was that thing you showed us? It was a what technique was it?
Well, the first one.
First one, yeah.
This is a cyanotype. This is printing with leaves. I'm writing a blog about it at the minute. I will put a link on there. But you can see the shapes of the leaves. You can see the imperfections, and it's very much a case of sort of working out which leaves print best. They've all got different shapes. They've all got different, and it's about what they can collect and do. I've got a whole collection of these. I love playing, and the fact that you can get a leaf from outside and some paint and see the most amazing structures. It's just, this is on material, and you could get, if you're back in a nursery, you could get your children to create some of these and then create their own bags, which will keep their stuff in, keep it safe. The more you can do with your hands is just, I just love it. Yeah. I just love playing. Sorry. If I'm messy, I'm happy.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you showered nicely before.
I did. Look, but I have noticed I've got paint on my thing, but I'm hiding it.
Always a teacher, always paint somewhere.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come back to Juliet, because something else that stayed with me, Juliet, from seeing you in action and hearing you talk to teachers is, if you haven't got a green space, if all you've got is a bit of tarmac and a car park or a roof or something, you can still be outside and still be learning. Can you just show us or talk us through how there is no excuse, whatever your school?
Well, I think one of the things is that we are the biggest resource ourselves, and it's our interactions with that space that make the difference. So going back to Maxine's comment about, my goodness me, I've got children with, I'm working on their working memory. How do we make it last? So one of the things you can start doing is just very simple things like, as you go outside, you can take 5 steps, stop and point, and you just say to your partner what you see. Now, normally I would have done this joined up, but you can still do that at 2 meters. You can still do what I would call a ping pong, where you literally, count to 5, look around, I see the white cloud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I see the washing line.
Yeah, to add to that, sometimes I say to children, we all start off at the same place, and say, right, you can take 20 steps in any direction you want to. When you're there, stop and take a photograph from your point of view, something that's interesting, which is exactly the same, but they're all going in different directions, and then it's come back, go 20 steps somewhere else. And that's a really simple exercise. You can make it as long or as short as you want, but that's the same thing.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So there's just stuff like that. The other thing I would always do is ask children and families, because there's a question about how you get parents involved, is send out requests that help people bring stuff, particularly for concrete jungles. So I like to use sticks of different lengths. So often you can ask children, you can get them to cut out of a scrap piece of card 10 centimeters, and you can say, could you please go to your local park and bring back 10 sticks that are that long? And if 30 children do that, then suddenly you've got 300 sticks, all of 10 centimetres each, that then you can use for doing different art activities, different maths activities outside. So I do a lot on gathering material to use outside. But the other thing you can just do is ask children to find something interesting. Literally, as Jane has said, you send them off, find something interesting and bring it back, and you share what you've got. So, and you would be surprised that in the most concrete jungle, what can be found. And if, like me, you worry, you just put a size limit no bigger than your hand, and your safety measure is there anything you know you shouldn't bring back, even if it's very, very interesting. And then the ecological measure is, can you put that back where you found it or where you think it should belong? So if it's a bit of litter, it might go back into the litter bin rather than being chucked away.
Wow. And the idea of the sticks, I think you mentioned it earlier, is we know that the virus doesn't stay so long on these natural objects compared to a plastic counting stick or the Lego or whatever, which is more likely to remain. There's a question about sand. What about has there been any research on COVID and sand and how long it stays?
Well, you see, this is where, no, I mean, what we have to understand is that the precise questions we want to have answered, we don't have answers for yet. And therefore, we have to use common sense. Common sense is built upon your experience and knowledge and understanding. And so if you are being asked to make a decision by somebody who may not have the experience, knowledge and understanding, then very often you may get a decision that is maybe not as appropriate as you would have hoped. So some of you will be in situations where sand will be banned, along with mud and all sorts of other things. There'll be others, though, that will take a more pragmatic approach and will say, well, we manage our sand anyway. First of all, to keep sand clean and healthy, it needs played with. Secondly, it needs raked down each night so that you can see if there's been any disturbance. If you do put a cover on it, it does need to be a mesh cover, because otherwise all sorts of unhealthy things can grow underneath and manifest underneath a blanket cover. So mesh is better generally. And therefore, if there is something that causes concern, like say, for example, a child does a massive sneeze at the sandpit, oh my goodness me, and then they look like they're a bit hot and unwell, not a good sign. So probably what you're going to do then is close off the sandpit. You are going to put down a little bit of Milton sterilizer, just like you would if an animal does its business. You remove that clump of sand around it, off you go, do a bit of sterilizing, keep it out of bounds for a while and keep going. That would be my pragmatic approach, but I totally accept that that might be deemed too risky by those who don't understand how sand works and how children play.
Gillian has just put forward that government guidance, I'm assuming, I don't know which government, maybe it's different, for early years says not to use sand.
Then you have to go with what that guidance is. If it's guidance and you feel strongly, you would have to have a very good risk assessment. Yeah. And I think this is the thing, the government decisions are often made. So I have challenged questions around sand nationally, and for example, if you look at ROSPA's guidance, the Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents, they do not recommend a cover other than a mesh one if you feel you must, but our infection prevention and control guidelines say that you must have a cover. But they argue that they're coming from different theoretical perspectives. I can't tell anyone to ignore government advice, but I can say be judicious. Yeah. Be judicious in your interpretation.
UK Early Years released on Sunday. Julian is backing that up. So,
is that UK or Scottish? Yeah. When you say UK, I would suggest that Scottish people and Welsh people and Northern Ireland people check their national advice for their own countries, because it is different in education in the different sections of the country.
What do you reckon Denmark's doing?
Pardon?
Sand? What do you reckon Denmark would be doing with sand?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Right. What they're doing. What have we got? We've got about eight minutes left. Let's. Where do we? There's two things I want to cover. Where do we start? What would be the first? No, I want to cover this, the gap. There's a lot of talk at the moment about the gap and about catching up and about behaviour and about we need to sort of just bring them in and sit them down and squash them down and get them to catch up, and especially children from poorer backgrounds who haven't been doing, haven't as much time at the computer, therefore they're going to fall even further behind. What is the impact, do you think, of a school that is saying we're going to use outdoor learning to improve the gap? What are the implications there? Juliet.
I think that's a very sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, this gap is an interesting. We like our gaps in education, don't we? And again, as a general rule, there's a lot of things that children can and do catch up on if they've missed a period of education. That goes back through history. What you can do with the outdoors, though, is, and we'll certainly find that the recent work I've been doing with Dundee, we're getting some interesting results. We're finding that children have greater engagement with lessons outdoors, and that there is a knock-on effect back inside as well when it comes to looking at maths in particular. And therefore, using the outdoors as part of a strategy to improve attainment is perfectly reasonable.
Right.
But remember play too. The outdoors is as much about play times, and we need the therapeutic value of play when children come back.
Right.
I think if you think about staff well-being and pupil well-being, if there is so much pressure on to catch up and close the gap, that's not going to work, because the kids don't learn when they're panicky, the staff are not going to be relaxed, and they need to be able to have this therapeutic aspect, and they will learn. You said earlier on, I make myself invisible, and I've watched children make real deep learning connections themselves by being outside, because there is no pressure. I'm worried that they're going to be sitting regimented, that it's going to be right, we have to do this, we have to do this. And I fully understand the pressure that teachers are under and really sympathise. But I can also see from the other side the pressure that parents have been under to try and keep their children. What are we keeping them up to? What have they missed? They've had other things, and I think by actually allowing them to learn at a different sensory pace is so important. This whole, giving them a virtual hug is more important than doing their phonics. And I'm sorry if I've upset anybody by saying that. I
apologise. You've worked in some, let's say, challenging schools from challenging socioeconomic backgrounds, Jane.
Yeah.
And if we're saying, and one of the reasons in England they're trying to leave or open the schools is because children from these backgrounds are falling behind, and there's this gap, as if there wasn't a gap before, which there was. What have you witnessed in terms of the impact on children from poorer backgrounds in terms of being outside in your work in the schools you've been into, and including special schools? I think the Dave Whittaker's special school in Barnsley where you've done work. What's the impact there?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in a lot of special schools, and Barnsley is quite deprived in certain areas. And I've worked in special schools. I've worked in really sort of severe special schools. And the inclusion aspect that you give children by taking them outside, if they're sitting and they can't write or learn or whatever, then they get more and more stressed. Whereas if you take them outside, this more sensory approach, and even the sensory approach inside, at Springwell, they've got quiet corners, they've got tactile corners, they've got corners with sand, but outside is just, I just think we need to take a step back, and like nature is sort of coming to the fore, and you said the birds. I think we need to stop worrying that they've missed a term. Let's go back to Enid Blyton. They've missed a term. All right, it's not the end of the world. Everybody's missed a term. And I know that there are lots of deprived children, but they've had other experiences. Maybe some of these deprived children don't see their parents because their parents are out at work from 6 o'clock in the morning till night time to try and feed them. And this has been one of the occasions where they have spent time with their parents. It swings and roundabouts, but I really think that the children's well-being and the staff well-being has got to be the focus.
Right, okay. And being outside can contribute significantly, as we touched earlier to that well-being. We've got 3 minutes, or probably down to 2 minutes. I want to come back to, so thank you, Jane, for that. Juliet, what would be the first 3 things for a school to think about when it's okay, we're going to go outside because of social distancing? 3 things, and you've got a minute.
Rope, Juliet.
Yeah, what are they? I'm in B&Q, what do I do?
Okay, first of all, I would like to reassure people that if you haven't spent that much time working outside with children, your skills and competencies as an educator are good enough.
Yeah.
And we need to think about things being good enough, not outstanding, but good enough in this. And that the more you go outside, the more familiar it will be, and therefore the more better able you are to adapt. But just like any change, you have to kind of take a big deep breath and go for it. So that's maybe not 3 full things, but that would be fine.
You can do it. It'll be okay. Draw on your natural, your professional wisdom,
and enjoy it.
Be brave, just go for it and see what happens, and as long as you're in your health and safety, and enjoy it. I like that. Wow, that was I think a fantastic conversation, exactly what I wanted. So lots of practical ideas, and also an understanding of what underpins outdoor learning, the fact that we can all do it and we all need to be doing it, and now is a really good time to be doing it. And I think if we get people outside and seeing all those benefits that you both described in the next few weeks and months, we won't get them back in, and I think that can only be a good thing. If you remember, if you enjoyed that, well, not if you do it anyway, chuck some money in the buckets of NHS Relief Project or Winston's Wish or Big Issue or RSPB. If you want to carry on the conversation, at ITL Worldwide on Twitter. If you want to ask any more questions, send them to me and I'll field them. ian@independentthinking.co.uk. Our website, you can find out more about Juliet and see Jane's amazing photos. IndependentThinking.com, IndependentThinkingPress.com, which is so many of the books that we've produced in the partnership with Crown House. At the moment, we've seen 3 books, product placements so far. Jane's 1 and Juliet's 2 that Jane's did photography for. They're available for 30% off using the code CPD30. Oh, another one, Den Building. I forgot that one. More Jane's photography. If you want to get an ebook,
Den Building.
If you want to get an ebook, they're now 50% off using via IndependentThinkingPress.com. The government got rid of VAT on ebooks, which means all of a sudden ebooks are now the same sort of price, and also a lot better for the environment in many ways. So 50% off all ebooks on IndependentThinkingPress.com. And I think that's it. Midday over here, 11 o'clock over there. If you've got any more conversations you want to be part of, come along, grab a ticket. We now have to deal with 122 angry people outside who didn't get in, but we'll think about that later. Thank you, Nina, in the background, working in mysterious ways. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Nina.
So lovely to see you. I can't wait to see you properly, and Juliet as well. And we'll have a pint in Howell's pub at some point, as soon as we possibly can.
Certainly will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.